Hey, Work Positive Nation. It used to be that most people look for new job opportunities only at the beginning of the year. Not anymore. Now they're looking all year long. That means you need to work on retention nonstop, reducing team turnover every chance you get, especially to keep top talent. So here's the good news. My guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast has helped organizations find, hire, grow, and keep top talent, saving them millions of dollars that would otherwise be lost to recruiting. With her help, these companies have achieved dramatic growth because they kept the best people. And she's done it for more than 25 years. So let's discover how to grow revenue and reduce expenses by retaining top talent on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast.
Welcome to the Work Positive Podcast with your host, executive coach and culture architect, Dr. Joey Fawcett. Discover strategies and tactics that work positive as Dr. Joey talks with industry leaders who create a positive work culture that attracts top talent and reduces team turnover. Discover how you can create a work positive culture that increases productivity and profits. Here's your host, Dr. Joey.
Work Positive Nation, help me, join me in welcoming an amazing guest to the Work Positive Podcast, Roberta Matuson. Roberta, welcome to the Work Positive Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
I am delighted to have you. We got so much to talk about today. Let's just jump right into it. We were talking before we started recording about you can't make this stuff up, right?
No.
The things that we hear about work cultures. And so you've just written a brand new book, third edition of Suddenly in Charge. There's some stories in there, Roberta, that you couldn't make up if you wanted, could you?
There are stories in there about what happened to me when I was tossed into management at the ripe old age of 24. I was in the executive suite.
That's amazing.
Any funny 24-year-olds, or if you were ever 24, that we all thought that we were like really smart and knew everything.
Oh, I knew I was smart. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot of lessons the hard way, which of course I share in the book. But more importantly, I weave in stories of other people who have been suddenly in charge on how to manage up, manage down, and succeed all around.
Amazing. So managing up comes first. Talk about that.
Well, I always say that if you don't manage up, you're not going to have to worry about managing down.
Yeah, you're
because
not going to be around.
You're never going to be a manager, and you probably won't be around. So it's really important. And it's really not a skill. Managing up is not a skill that's taught in school. And if you look for courses, you don't see a lot of courses on how to manage up. Yet, if you look at the most successful people in organizations, they're the people who have very strong relationships, especially at the top of the organization.
So what are some keys to managing up, Roberta?
Well, you have to start out first by decoding your boss and figuring out what kind of boss you have. So, for example, I had a boss named Martin, and it only took me 2 meetings to figure out that he was a bottom line kind of guy, because I'd be in a meeting and then probably 5 minutes in, he would look at his watch and I'd be like, okay. I shouldn't tell him everything I know. I should tell him what he needs to know, and that's it. So he was the kind of leader that just wanted the facts. And if he wanted more information, he would ask and I would give it to him. And so when you figure that out, and in the book, I teach you how to decode your boss, you can then really start to develop this great relationship. Because after a while, I'd walk into his office and say, hey, Martin, here's my question. I wouldn't even say, how are you? I'd be like, here's my question. And we became very, very good buddies after that.
Yeah. You got to determine what are the playground rules with Martin, right? And
who holds the power in the organization. And there's just a ton of stuff that when you're in any environment that's, even if it's a nonprofit, you got to figure this stuff out and you have to do it quickly.
So I decode the boss and I discover how to best manage up. Then what about managing down, Roberta?
Well, you have to it really starts with hiring the right people, because it's really hard to motivate people who aren't the right people, or they're not the right people for the jobs that they're in. So you have to get really good at figuring out how to do what I call select for success. And I do a lot of training around that in organizations, how to select the best for your situations. It's just really critical that you do that. And then you meet people where they are and stop trying to assume that everybody wants to move up in the organization or everyone wants to work on these big projects. Like, really figure out where your team members are and support them in where they want to go.
Yeah, so we're all about attracting top talent in the work positive culture. What are some of those ways that you ensure that you're selecting for success?
Well, it's funny that you're all about that because I wrote the book called Talent Magnetism.
Absolutely.
And it's funny because when I wrote that book, I don't read my books until they're done.
Yeah.
So after I finished writing the book, I decided, let me read the book. And I just had this crazy aha moment. And I realized that attracting top talent is all about magnetic leadership. And that there are some leaders who are so magnetic that no matter where they go, people follow them. And people stick to them through thick and thin, which is why the following book I wrote was called The Magnetic Leader. So it all is connected. And if you want to do a great job of attracting good talent, then you have to have really good leadership in place.
So what are some of those hallmark traits of magnetic leaders, Roberta?
Well, a lot of those traits are being authentic, being transparent, because you don't want to be the kind of leader where people don't know which version of you is showing up today, right?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I need some consistency when I walk through the door.
Right. I mean, if you're a terrible leader, just be consistently a terrible. I know what I have. I know what to deal with. But if one day you're like the nicest guy and then the next day you're a terror, I don't know what I'm dealing with here. It makes it really hard for me, the employee, to be productive. But it does come down to transparency. And when people ask you questions, being honest with them. And when you can't be, just saying, I'm not able to share that with you right now. But when I am, I will certainly come back to you and tell you. But don't lie to them and say, oh, yeah, everything's okay. We're not going to have any layoffs. Meanwhile, you're in the war room figuring out who's staying, who's going.
Yeah, that really sucks when that happens. It's so disingenuous. And of course, other persons hear that because the individual who's told, oh, everything's fine, goes back and shares the good news with everybody else. And so when those layoffs do happen, there's just that disingenuous effect, which really is emotional, psychological withdrawals from the trust bank in that culture, right?
Oh, yeah. All you have to do is go on Glassdoor with a bucket of popcorn and just read all the comments. And you're just like, whoa.
I know. Really? You did that? And you can't make that stuff up, right?
No, you can't. And you do not want to be like the top topic on Glassdoor because there's not a lot of positive things reported there.
Oh, no, I know. So we've attracted top talent and we've been authentic and transparent. We're becoming this magnetic leader. How do we take it to the next level and reduce team turnover, retain our top talent?
Well, that's great. That's a really great question because I always say, what is the point of hiring top talent if you can't keep these people?
Yeah.
And so number one that people really need to understand, and especially today, some people say that money doesn't matter. Well, the people that say money doesn't matter have money. But to the rest of the people, money does matter. And people want to feel like they're compensated based on the value that they're bringing to the organization. So if you think that, it's okay for us to be paying under market because there's a lot more people than there are jobs right now, let me tell you, as soon as those tides turn, and they will,
they do.
You're going to see everybody bolting. So why not treat people fairly and why not pay them based on the value that they're contributing to your organization? I think that's really important.
And what are some other ways? Because there's that compensation factor, but there are other intangible compensation factors that accompany those paychecks.
Well, yes, I think today's workforce, they really want to see companies invest in their personal development. And we're reading about these training centers being sold off and things like that, and messages going out there. Oh, yeah, you can take an online course and you'll be fine. I'm the author of over 20 online courses. I can tell you, you're not going to learn how to ride a bike by watching a course. You're much in a much stronger position if your company's providing you with executive coaching, which a lot of my clients actually will do for their people, and really investing in your people and helping them accomplish their hopes and dreams.
Yeah, which means you have to care about your team enough to discover their hopes and dreams. What are some of the great ways you've seen magnetic leaders coax those hopes and dreams out of the teams?
I don't think it has to be coaxed. What I tell my clients to do is I challenge them and I say, I want you to sit down with each one of your employees and I want you to ask them the following. What were your hopes and dreams when you took this job? Do you still have these hopes and dreams now that you've been here? And then the last part is, what can I do to help you achieve those dreams? And you have to listen, right? And you can't be argumentative. You just need to listen. And you'll be surprised how when somebody joined your company, how optimistic they were. And they hoped that they would get to this level, or they'd be working on these interesting projects, or the company would have invested in them. And somewhere along the line, maybe those dreams did not come true, but you have the ability to grant their wishes. But you can't do that if you don't know what they are. So don't assume, oh, this person is in this particular space in their career, so they must want this. They may not.
Yeah, that's an assumptive factor that oftentimes is false. Just like my assuming my wife loves red roses. No, she doesn't. She prefers yellow or coral colored roses. Every time I go buy roses for her, which is often, right? And so I ripped all these red roses out of my rose bed just to plant the kinds that she liked, right?
That was very smart.
Yeah, exactly. And it took me a few purchases to get that
You're a
right.
slow learner.
Yeah, but I am a learner. I got to cross the finish line. But so often we just keep doing the same thing we've been doing, and then we wonder, why did that person leave? Why did that person leave? Oh, must be something wrong with them, or they're just going to be paid more.
Yes. Let me just say this. When somebody writes down, when you're asking them why they're leaving, and they say a better opportunity, okay, and now you're feeling good because you can go back to your boss and say, oh, they left for a better opportunity.
What is that?
The follow-up question to that is, what made you even consider a better opportunity? Because obviously something was going on here that you were open to taking that call. So what was that?
So I become aware that people are leaving for a better opportunity on my team. And then somebody says, Sherm discovered that 57% of all people leaving a job leave because of a bad boss.
Oh, yeah.
What can I do to transform myself from bad boss, featured on Glassdoor, to a magnetic leader? What are some considerations for me?
You can read my books, right? No, I'm just kidding. Listen, there's a lot you can do. And the best thing that you can do is to find a coach. And I say that and find an external coach, because an external coach will be able to do what we call a 360. And they'll be able to talk to your team members. And when I do this, I always just ask a few questions. And the first being, what does Joe do really well? Right? And then I ask, what's getting in his way? And those are the questions. And when I'm able to feed that information back to my client, because I feed it back in the exact voice of whoever was responding to my questions, my interviews, they get it. They see the picture. They're like, oh, and then what we wind up doing is we work on one thing and we move that forward a mile. We don't try to change 10 things. So it's really important, if you want to improve your leadership, instead of making changes, because maybe you're really a good leader in some areas and now you're going to be a not so good leader because you changed, you best find out how you're being perceived, because leadership is really all about perception.
So that's delivering the good, the bad, and the ugly news, right?
Yeah. When I do that, people are really surprised. In most cases, and I've only had one case where this didn't happen, that they were thought much more highly by the people I spoke with than they thought was ever even possible.
Wow, that's amazing. So delighted to hear that. I'm hearing this feedback through this 360 review. How transparent am I with the team? Here's what I heard from you, or do I just work with you behind closed doors on this development?
No, I think the most powerful thing you can do is go back to your team and say, wow, I heard you. Here's some of the feedback I received. Thank you. Was it hard to hear? Yes, but I heard you. And here's what my coach and I are going to be working on. And I need you to stay in the loop because she's going to be in touch with you and I need your help. And I need you to call me out when I do some of those things that you shared that don't work for you.
Amazing. So what does that do for the team when they hear that?
Oh, you can hear Hallelujah playing in the background because they're so delighted that, oh my gosh, like he finally gets it.
Yeah. And working on this together. So he's listening.
There's hope.
Yeah, there's hope, right? That this will become a more positive work culture around here and we can shed some of that toxicity.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Roberta Matuson is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive podcast. If you are where you can flip on your phone to the show notes for this, you'll find there a link over on Amazon to Suddenly in Charge, to the third edition of that. Roberta, I'm greatly intrigued, the third edition. So what changed between the first and the third edition? What are we going to read?
A lot. There was significant changes between the first and the second edition. I added like a bunch more chapters because I felt like, oh, leaders need to know about this. The third edition I wanted to write because after COVID, the whole workplace changed. And I felt like the second edition really, obviously, this work from home thing and this remote work and the hybrid work, that really wasn't a big thing in 2017. But today it is. And I felt like the advice that I had been giving, like, oh, you have to do this in person. Hello, lady, I'm not allowed in the room with these people, or my new boss now is across the country. I felt like it really needed to be more relevant. Added again, a few more chapters. So the book now is like really thick. But the good news is in the way it's set up is that you don't have to read the whole thing. You can just go to the chapter on difficult work conversations or how to terminate somebody and have them thank you on the way out or how to manage a difficult boss. You could just go and take the information as you need it.
So many of our clients today find themselves in exactly that place. There may be some, I'm going to say resident members of the team, but particularly with small business owners, then there are those who are distributed. What are some of the things that have changed and you recommend in Suddenly in Charge for managing up and managing down to create that kind of positive work culture, part in person and part remote?
I think that in the book, I highlight a woman who works for Zillow, and their whole company has gone remote, actually. And she makes it a point of whenever she gets on a call with one of her team members, her first question is, how are you? And then she stops. Or how was your weekend? It's not, okay, Sue, let's go over your numbers, blah, 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 blah. Like she's really present. And people know that she's present. You can tell based on her body language that she really wants to hear how you're doing. So I think really being engaged in your conversation rather than looking at your watch, going, oh my God, like I got to get off this call, will make a huge difference when you're trying to manage remotely.
Yeah. Seems like we're having more conversations about things like empathy, emotional intelligence, those kinds of things now, because we're having to go an extra mile. The things we used to be able to do in person, non-verbally, perhaps, we're having to work a little bit harder to do now. Are you finding that true, that the conversations around empathy and emotional intelligence are much more common now?
I think they are because of the younger generation. I'm a parent of two Gen Z people. So I have an insider view. They don't want to be managed the same way that we were managed. Like they want to know that somebody actually cares about them, right? They don't want to be just this widget in this big company. And so they do need empathy when they're struggling. I don't know about you, but I would have never told my boss, oh my gosh, like I'm struggling mentally, like I have to go to my therapist. Like I think there was a study done and a very large percentage of young people thought nothing to put on their calendar appointment with therapist. And rather than looking at that as an older manager and going, are you kidding me? It helps to be empathetic and say, wow, I'm sorry you're struggling. Yeah. Is there anything I can do? Yes, you can stop asking me. But
yeah, whereas with our generation, it was more like, suck it up, Skippy, and you're just going to move forward.
Yeah, you better be here at work.
That's right. That's right. What do you mean you can't come because you're going to see your therapist? And managers would say things like, I'm not a psychiatrist.
Exactly. You do need to be one.
Yeah. Man, I welcome the millennials and the Zers to humanize work.
I agree. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that they're here. I love working with them.
I know. And the conversations are more authentic, transparent, deeper. And I don't mean to suggest that our generation of boomers is, but some of us are, just tone deaf to these kinds of things, but we're learning.
We're just not used to it. It's not our norm. So
not a part of our story.
You got to meet people where they are, and it's a whole different world for them.
It is indeed. And meeting people where they are seems to me to be one of the great challenges today, because in some companies, you've got like 4 different generations at work.
Yes.
A friend of mine, Marisa Andrade, was talking about a company she worked with that had 5. Can you imagine 5 different generations at work? So if I'm seeking to be a magnetic leader and to manage up and manage down, how do I even begin to meet that diverse a group of people where they are?
There's 2 things. First of all, in the book, there is a chapter on managing the different generations at work.
Excellent.
That's number 1. But I'm gonna give you a little clue so you don't have to read the chapter. When you look at what each generation wants, we have so much more in common than not. Yeah. And the bottom line is, no matter how old you are, people want to be treated with respect and they want to feel valued. And it doesn't matter if they're 22 years old or they're 80. That's what people want. So I would focus less on putting people in boxes. Yeah. And if you treat everyone in the manner in which I just described, you'll be fine.
Yeah, respect goes a long ways, doesn't it?
And I was in a conversation with my daughter the other day, and she does some freelance work, and she was talking to legal in some big company. And she said, Mom, the woman she wasn't very nice. She just was very dismissive and assumed that I didn't know anything about contracts. She said, I've been doing contracts for 4 years. She was just really turned off by that. She might know more about contracts than the woman on the other end. So let's not make assumptions here.
Yeah, which means that, I'm back to emotional intelligence now, I've got to capture my ego or my insecurities and just come to each person, seeing them as someone from whom I can learn.
Exactly. Yeah. I learned, oh my gosh, the other night I was at dinner with a group of women. I belong to the Boston Club, and it's a organization for women in business. Okay. And oh my gosh, like I learned, like there's this feature that the 2 of the younger women at the table showed me on LinkedIn where you could just push this little thing and one of the QR codes would come up with all your information and somebody could just scan. I was like, oh, this is brilliant. Like you would have thought like I would have learned like a foreign language, which to me it was, but just if I wasn't open to that, I'd be like, I don't need those QR codes. They're stupid. Yeah. But I thought it was really cool.
Way cool, way cool. And you obviously have a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset.
I do.
Yeah. And so we're wanting to gather so much information and learn from each other, which means there has to be that basic respect that I can mentor some, but then reverse mentoring can occur too, and I can learn a QR code on LinkedIn. By the way, where was that on your profile?
I'm not telling you. You're going to have to ask that 4-year-old that's upstairs taking a nap.
Absolutely. And to your point, for me, it started really early back 100 years ago when VCRs came out. And I was like, okay, I can open the manual. And intuitively, our older daughter says, I'll show you how, Dad, and just begins pushing buttons. And pretty soon there's the programming set up to record something. And I'm like,
I know. My husband and I keep a list so that when our son, who's a software engineer, comes home, we're like, okay, we have our list. In the old days, your parents would keep a list of things they wanted you to help change the light bulb or fix a drawer or something.
right?
For us, it's the technology.
Yeah, exactly. So there's an amazing opportunity to respect and learn back and forth between generations. What an amazing way to capture human capital at its finest within every organization. So if that's a challenge and we just turned it on its ear, now it's an asset for us. What are some other challenges you're seeing in companies today on their path to creating a more positive work culture?
I think one of the biggest challenges today is the way that they're handling recruitment and the way that they're handling applicants. I think it's horrific. And I can't tell you how many times I see on LinkedIn or people write to me and say, you're never going to believe this. And this whole thing of posting jobs and then interviewing all these candidates and never getting back to people. What these companies don't realize is that every time they do that, they're hurting their employer brand. And I've had situations where I've been treated so poorly. I'm not buying your product. I'm not giving you my money. I don't care. And I think that that the people in recruitment and the hiring managers, I think that they're just oblivious to all of this and the damage that they're doing to their brands.
And it really is an inconsistent messaging, because if I'm messaging to my customers one way about the brand, but internally I'm messaging another way, that inauthenticity is going to show up on a BS meter somewhere and somebody's going to call it, right?
Totally. Yeah. So I'm really disappointed in how that's going these days.
So what is the key to flipping that into an asset?
The key is thinking about your hiring process. And there is a reason why people are given the title hiring manager. And every hiring manager should be taught how to select for success. They should be recruiting 24/7 for their team and for the company. And to flip this onto HR and say, oh, hey, you're responsible for 125 requisitions that are open. And yeah, we know you have 3 people on your team. None of them are dedicated recruiters. What's going on? Why can't you fill these jobs? Is crazy. So I think what we really need to do is go back to the 50s where the hiring managers actually hired people and stop this game of, using all these tools to screen candidates out.
Yeah, over specialization has dehumanized the whole process, hasn't it?
It has. It's horrible.
Really has. Roberta Matuson is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. In the show notes, you'll find, just in case you're on the Peloton or walking your dog. By the way, Roberta has a Westie, right, that gets walked often.
I do.
Yeah. So all the cat lovers, we love cats too, but we just have dogs, okay? So you can click in the show notes there if you're on the Peloton or something. Suddenly in Charge, the 3rd edition, that link takes you over to Amazon. You can get your copy now because you've gotten some great tidbits, enough. Think of them as appetizers, and you want the full course, right? So go get your copy of the 3rd edition of Suddenly in Charge. Roberta, what website can Work Positive Nation go to learn more?
You can go to MatchisonConsulting.com. I would welcome, I've got a newsletter there. You can sign up for that. If you happen to mention that you heard me on this podcast, I'm more than happy to share one of my Udemy courses with you. So write to me and just put the name of the show and Udemy, and then I will give you a choice. You can have the Managing Difficult Employee course or the Pay Transparency course. And both of those courses actually retail for $199, but we're going to give it to your listeners for free.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for your generosity. And Melissa Daimler from Udemy is one of our former guests here on the Work Positive Podcast. So all of us work together to bring you, Work Positive Nation, the very best experiences so that you can create a positive work culture. Work Positive Nation always wants to know from my guest, Roberta, about one thing So, Roberta Matuson, what's your one thing that you would recommend to Work Positive Nation to start doing today to create a positive work culture?
Well, I think you have to start with yourself, and you have to come to work every day presuming good intent and coming in with a positive attitude. So many of us are burnt out and we're like, you go into work like, okay, who's gonna crap on me today or whatever. But I think that when you come in and you come in with a positive mental attitude, I think it makes a huge difference in the way you're perceived and the way you treat others.
Yeah, so show up positive today, Work Positive Nation. Roberta Matuson is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. MatusonConsulting.com is the website you want to go to right now. That link is in the show notes, as well as Suddenly in Charge, the third edition, which is over at Amazon. It's hot and now, so go get your copy as it's just come out in 2024. Roberta, thank you so much for this amazing wisdom that you've shared. You can't make this stuff up. And it's the real deal. Thank you so much, Roberta, for helping us begin today to create a positive work culture.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Please share this podcast with your friends who are HR and small business leaders so they can do one thing today to create a positive work culture that increases productivity and profits. I'd like to give you a free Work Positive course just for listening. It's called Something to Talk About, and it's transformed the work conversations of so many people all over the world. Get your free copy when you go to workpositive.today/something to talk about, and you can start transforming your conversations today. Remember, it pays to work positive.